So, welcome, Rory. Thanks for taking a bit of time out of your busy day to have a conversation with me today. If you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and your company.
Sure. Thanks for having me first and foremost. So I'm Rory, I'm the founder of Live. We are a technology integrator, specializing in the luxury home area, but we also do quite a lot of work in commercial and hospitality. We're based in London in the UK, but we also have offices in Dubai and Los Angeles, so we have a global reach. And we set the company up back in 2015.
Brilliant. And how did this come up? Because it's people are always so curious to say, this sounds like they'll hear what you're doing and it sounds like a very great business, great industry. How on earth do you get into this?
It's a little bit accidental in my case. I set the business up originally as like a IT provider or IT support provider when I was still at school, helping friends, family, and referrals that came sort of that way. It was really when broadband became a thing. People started putting it in their homes, wanted to understand how they could get it to serve more than one computer in the home. Wi-Fi started to become a thing, and it kind of naturally grew off the back of that. So I did that for 6 or 7 years almost on my own. And then I started to hire a team, and we've sort of built organically from there. And networking actually is really the core of any good system that we install now has to have a strong network. So I think the pedigree kind of was built in from an early stage. And we've grown, as I say, naturally. And with, we're now a team of 12 in the UK, and we serve a very wide variety of clients.
Brilliant. By the way, what about we can understand why you want to be in Dubai, and of course the American market is enormous. Um, how did that come about? Did you make that choice and say, no, I want to go to Dubai, I want to go to LA?
Yeah, LA came about sort of through personal connections. I had a few friends there who were building their own homes and were struggling to find a company that they could rely on, really. I think that's one of the things about this industry that's interesting is it sort of sits at quite a crossroads of something which is inherently pretty technical and something which is pretty untechnical, which is the installation of things into a property, right? So you're kind of at this, as I say, a slightly strange crossroads where you get a lot of guys who, set up one man shows like I was once upon a time. And I think that they wanted a company who had experience, but also a name they could trust, and a company that had like a small team, really. That seemed to be the difference in helping us win work there was there weren't that many companies that were our sort of size and had our abilities, I guess. The Dubai thing is much more recent. It's in progress at the moment, so we're establishing ourselves as we speak. And really, the feeling there is that there is so much growth in the GCC as a whole, particularly with what's happening in Saudi, with all of the giga projects that are happening there. And the UAE itself is just going through such a through such a boom, particularly in the real estate market, that there is a huge demand for companies who do what we do. And similar to LA, really, having a company that's established and knows what it's doing and has experience across a broad range of sectors, there's a value proposition there, and people are recognizing that.
Brilliant. No, great. And it's one of those key things we talk to people about is when I have clients, I say, what is your target market? And I mean, I can see, quality homes, people who've got a little bit of spare money. It makes perfect sense. I mean, these two locations, you're going to be abundant with these
Mm,
kind of people. So sometimes people go into a market, got great product, but if you don't get the right people, then you're going to struggle.
sure.
So on that basis, how would you describe a typical client?
Very varied these days, actually. I think the smart home particularly has become much more accessible. So where previously it was considered to be only accessible for those who are, building a James Bond home, it now trickles all the way down to those who are doing, smaller renovation projects, or even developers now are doing some level of smart technology and integration into their developments. kind of with the idea that they'll deliver something that to sort of minimum value product, and then it'll be the purchaser or the homeowner to then add to it to make it even more sort of accessible. There are lots of things happening in terms of energy. So quite a lot of stuff we do is to do with lighting, shading, and temperature control. And some of those things are built in very early on in the process with all of the sort of more entertaining stuff, sound, video, etc., kind of layered on top. So as I said, yeah, it really does trickle down a lot further than you might think these days, and it's become much more accessible with the advent of technology that people can install themselves. But in our space, we obviously operate more in with this bespoke kind of hat on. Um, I would say that yeah, in the last few years, certainly, the costs have actually gone down quite a lot.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So it's much more accessible. People listening here might be want to be contacting you, see, put project in their home.
Yeah, well, we're
Because
here.
it's might
That's
not be,
we can help anybody pretty much.
yeah, it might not be as expensive as they're thinking initially, if you've got a small project to start with. And
Exactly.
as you said, you probably got clients who start with something small and then you never know,
Yeah.
they might move to a bigger property, they have friends who have property, and so on and so on.
Exactly.
So,
And it's very common that we do single rooms to start with. So we have quite a lot of clients who have, I don't know, either a spare bedroom or a garage that's not used or something like that. We often repurpose those rooms for, I don't know, a dedicated media room. So something with, a large TV, proper sound systems, acoustic treatment to actually make that room kind of usable. Particularly people who maybe are, their kids have left home or at uni or whatever. And they've got this space and they think, you know what, it's time to do something fun for myself. We also do a lot of work in outside spaces. So people who have back gardens, we can do outdoor audio, outdoor TVs. I know we live in the UK and the weather is a bit unpredictable at times, but there's still possibilities there for expanding technology into all sorts of spaces that might not sort of traditionally meet the eye.
yeah, yeah, that sounds very cool. Having a barbecue and having the football on, like the
Right?
World Cup next year or something. I mean, that would be pretty
Exactly.
cool, wouldn't it? Invite your
Yeah,
friends around. Oh, we're going to watch football. How are we going to watch it? Don't worry, we got it sorted in the garden. That would be pretty cool next year,
exactly.
wouldn't it? What 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 would you say makes you stand out from your competition?
I think experience. I've been doing this for quite a long time now, and my team also have a collective experience that is quite substantial. So we've seen a lot of different things. We know what works and what doesn't, and we are always trying to be at the cutting edge of what is in the market. So we attend two or three trade shows a year, which is where we get exposed to most of the most recent products. I think actually one of our sort of real advantages that maybe is not obvious is that most of the technology, believe it or not, for this industry comes out of the US. So as a UK operator, having a business over in LA, we get access to some of that technology a little bit earlier sometimes, or at least we know what's coming, maybe 6 to 9 months ahead of others. Not all of it makes its way to the UK, of course, but the majority of it does. And so we often can see and plan a little bit further ahead than most because we know we have that kind of inside track. But yeah, I would say experience first and foremost.
No, pretty cool. And also, I understand you do it in house because one of the things with some companies where you can lose a little bit of quality and control is if you outsource everything and you just design,
Yeah.
you can take a little bit of risk on quality. So,
Definitely. Yeah, having an in-house team has made a huge difference. We started out subcontracting a lot of our work, and you're absolutely right that the quality was there, but you just had to be you had to be much more on the case in terms of checking, many more points. Now obviously we can implement our own training programs. We have a sort of control over the quality of our own engineers and how they operate. I just think, yeah, because we have that experience and because we have that sort of ability to control things a little bit better, I think the output tends to be higher.
brilliant. Absolutely. So, one of the classic things is what mistakes have you made on the way that you can admit to?
Plenty. I think that the first thing about being a business owner and leader is own up to those mistakes when they do happen. Um, we're human at the end of the day, and being at the cutting edge means it's inevitable there are going to be things which go wrong because you're innovating. Um, what's been one of the things that's happened most recently? I think it's most of the things I can sort of think of. I can't think of a perfect example for you now, but generally it's that sort of stuff where we explain to a client, this is something we've not worked with before. It is, it's a sidestep or it's an improvement from something we have worked before. So it's not completely unknown to us, but it might take a little bit longer to get it to work the way we want it to. And so I think as long as that transparency is there from the outset, it helps
Yeah.
clients understand that it might take a little bit longer to get to the destination, but when they do, they're going to have something which is an improvement over something that maybe is, a few years old at that point. Um, from a business perspective, I think in our earlier days, we had quite a lot of problems establishing a team that was reliable. And so what I think my learning from that was that we should have implemented a more rigorous training program from an early date.
Mm.
Um, and so what that led to was more quality control problems, things just projects not really going quite to plan, and some disgruntled employees. Ultimately, if people don't feel that they have the support and nurturing that they need to improve and grow, that can be disenfranchising. So I think I learned that pretty early on that supporting your team and rallying around each other rather than just saying, oh, well, pointing fingers and saying it's someone's fault is far more constructive and beneficial in the long run.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because I do, if I find larger businesses and they're having any issues with team, the first thing I ask is, do you train them? Is there an induction? Because that frustrate, and also where do you get them? Because if you do get your friends and your mates and the guy down the pub tells you somebody's unemployed at the moment and whatever, you might find you have a bit of a rag bag of
Yeah,
staff, and then when stuff starts to go wrong, then you're kind of backtracking, as you said. So yeah, that's a great lesson. I think everybody should listen to that one. Whatever you want from them, train them the way you want it done.
exactly.
Um,
And I think you set out your parameters of what you expect from people at the get-go,
right at the
even if
beginning.
they don't have the experience or understanding to get there straight away. You work with people individually to understand their own pathway to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. Because in our industry in particular, for some reason, you do get people who come from all over the place with all sorts of previous experience, people who sidestepped into this industry. Even, believe it or not, we're in, we sit under the AV category. People who've worked in live events have almost no idea what it's like doing what we call sort of permanent install. Yes, okay, it sits in the same category, but actually the discipline is so different
Very
that
different.
the skills are semi-transferable. I would probably say. Even people
Yeah,
who worked as data engineers, we've had guys come through before who work as data engineers and want to get into AV. Okay, fine, they understand the principles of cabling and things like that, but then there's so much more you have to add on top of that to be able to say, okay, you're coming in with this level of knowledge. We need your knowledge to be here so that we can serve our clients sufficiently. That's a steep learning curve,
yeah.
and it's not always logical.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example actually, because setting up a stage in an empty building, a commercial site, and working in somebody's lovely home with the children and
Couldn't
everybody's
be
on
more
site
different.
is a very different ball game. Parking your van on their lawn, and there's lots of things you got to think about when you're working in a private home compared to somebody gives you a massive stage and says just get on with it at Glastonbury or somewhere. You
Exactly.
can park your van anywhere, you can do anything, you know, toilets everywhere, whatever. You do that. It's very different in people's
It
homes.
really is.
Do you have an interesting one I like to ask is do you have a routine or is it your day very variable?
My day is very variable, only because I'm across so much of the business every day. And I will jump from a marketing meeting to a finance meeting to a project planning meeting to seeing a client on any given day. And that is pretty typical for me, which I like actually. That's part of the reason I run my own business is that I like that variety and be able to move my brain from thinking in one way to thinking in another. Sometimes it's very strategic, sometimes you're really in the nitty-gritty detail of things. I that's for me, that is what makes me tick.
Oh, brilliant. So you're not one of these people that do a 5K run at 5 o'clock in the morning, down the gym,
I-
have a high protein breakfast and
No, I
fasting yoga.
I play some sport a couple of times a week with some other people. I play some football. I cycle to stay fit generally. I have a dog, so he gets walked every day for a nice, hour and a half. So that's actually my sort of mind clearing time. A lot of the, when I'm out with him in the park, that's when I try to do it in the morning. And it just allows me to kind of clear my head and think about what is going on, and you can mull over things. I take notes, I listen to podcasts, and I listen to people who I find interesting and who have influential things to say. We touched on it before the interview, but I listen a lot to people like Gary V because I feel that he has a lot of experience in marketing, which to me is still a little bit of a dark art, and
Yeah,
it's changing so fast,
very fast.
particularly with the advent of social media being what it is, and now AI coming on as well. It's all just you need beacons like that who are kind of a couple of steps ahead of the layman like me to be able to really pinpoint where things are going and what in his case where to put your spend pounds or dollars.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He seems to have a pretty good grip on how these different social platforms, for example, work, and why advertising on Facebook is much more efficient than advertising on Instagram. Things like that. That, as I said, if you're trying to do a lot of things yourself, which we do, we try to bootstrap quite a lot of what we do because we're not a big business. And I don't have endless marketing expenditure to pay agencies to do loads of that sort of thinking and work for us. You can kind of assimilate a lot of that knowledge yourself if you're careful about, trying to get two or three different opinions on things and making your own mind up about stuff and then experimenting in a way which is fairly low risk to see what hits.
Yeah, I love that. It's something we encourage. I mean, we're bringing over Gary V, which is really exciting. So,
Very cool.
God knows how much that's costing, but we won't get into that one. But yeah, he's going to be live in the UK. But I'm looking forward to that as well. But it's interesting what you say. One of the things we encourage is experiment. You use the term experiment. We might use different words, but the concept of try marketing, low risk, low cost, try it, test it, see what happens, change it. Because as you said, sometimes you it's not, you can't 100% predict the outcome sometimes.
Definitely not.
So you got to try
Even
it a bit.
though, yeah, even though something like Facebook is so detailed now in saying, you can target people in this area, this demographic or age group, whatever it might be, you have to really see whether that is. I might have an idea about what I think my target market is, but actually, for some products, that may not be right. Or for some
Yeah.
services, it might be a completely different people altogether. So that's really where, systems like that are very good because it allows you to be very granular and it allows you to, as I say, experiment and see what hits.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you mentioned Gary V. Who else comes to mind when you think of success? Who comes to mind? Doesn't have to be famous necessarily, but who comes to mind?
Um, I mean, I've followed lots of sort of successful business people, I think, over the years. That's probably where my basis of this sort of stuff comes from. Um, Gary's obviously very successful when it comes to marketing and what he's done. And I have a sort of uh, in a weird way, I have an interest in wine, and I know that's what his business was originally, right? He worked for his dad in his wine business, and he kind of grew that for him, and then spun out into becoming this sort of big marketing guy. I've got a couple of guys or people who I've worked with over the years who sort of become quasi mentors, advice givers, and people who I think have done things, quote unquote, the right way. Um, so I would say probably yeah, I can't think of anybody else sort of famous, if you will.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, there are some other people who've done very well in one thing and transferred into another. Someone like David Beckham, I always think is very interesting from how he's, managed to monetize himself.
yeah,
Gary Neville's another one who, is very big in property now and he's managed to use his money very well from his footballing career to kind of to do things like that. Um, Yeah, I think those are probably, a handful of just sort of standout people who I follow on social media and kind of like to see what they're up to and what they're doing. And I think, there's some sort of relevance to what we do, particularly with like what Gary Neville does as an example.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And your your answers actually demonstrate that you can learn from different places. You know, I encourage people not just to learn from people in your industry, but what can you learn from it could be from anywhere, as you said, anywhere that you would take an interest in. And what can you learn from them? Because Beckham is brand Beckham. I mean, he's been great at branding, even though you wouldn't. I've never heard him use the word, but he's
No,
definitely good at. He was a branding giant in a way.
yeah, but
Just changing
he's
his
had a lot of
hairstyle.
help. He's had a lot of help along the way, but I think that he saw what he had, and he really leveraged it.
He did. He did.
And he's become extremely successful off the back of it.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, for sure. And if you think of his talent and where he would rank in footballers compared to what he's done in achievement, it's way beyond
Oh yeah,
his actual ranking, if you put it that way. He's up there with the Messis and that, where
sure.
he wouldn't have ranked him as a footballer at that level, but certainly
No,
as a
no.
business person, he's
Yeah,
way up there. I mean, we can think of Ronaldinho, we can think of other footballers who have never don't look like they've really monetized their
yeah.
talent, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
I think it's
interesting.
become in this sort of current generation, it's also become a lot easier. I think if you
Yeah,
think about the original Ronaldo and the original Ronaldinho, they were successful in an era where that kind of thing was just not,
yeah, a bit
it
early for
wasn't
them.
possible, right? It was social media wasn't around. And I think that in so many ways, the advent of the smartphone and all of these sort of platforms that are now available have just made the mass market so much more accessible. I think actually Gary V talks about something like this in one of his podcasts that I listened to a while back about using advertising in a newspaper, which back in like the 60s was basically the best way to get in front of people because everybody read newspapers. Then it started to move to TV advertising, but then TV advertising, you had no real idea of your distribution because you didn't know how many people were actually watching. So his example was if you look at where we are now, it's actually more like newspaper advertising than anything else because you know what your distribution is, you know how many hands that newspaper is going into. In the same way on Facebook, you know how many people have seen your ad and how many people have clicked on it.
That's true,
But
true.
data
Yeah.
is just the data we have access to now is so huge and so important in decision making. My wife actually she works in data for a technology company, and so all of the decisions that are made in that business
Mm,
pretty much derive from the learning of current use of their system. So it's an app and a website, it's a marketplace,
yeah, yeah.
and all they do is learn about what people are doing, how they're doing it, what works, what doesn't work. So I learn a bit from her too in terms of kind of what they're seeing as success. It's a much bigger company obviously than us, so there's some things there, some takeaways, which she nuggets of information she gives me sometimes, which are very useful.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. So next 5 years, what do you is that too far ahead, or do you think about next 5 years for the
No, we've
business?
just been doing our 5 year strategies. We try to review. It's a little bit floating, and I think that COVID had a bit of an impact on what our 5 year horizon looked like. I think we had to come out of the back of COVID and just kind of get back into a place of reestablishing ourselves because it was, chaotic to say the least. Um, I do feel like it's kind of behind us now, and so we've just been doing our 5 year plan, and so I think that we have some growth expectations here in the UK, although they've been a little bit uh, we've reduced them slightly based on what seems to be happening in the economy. Obviously, Dubai is establishing, so I think that in 5 years from now, I'd like to have a good sized team out there, sort of 5 to 10 people. And again, starting to bring all of our learnings here from the UK over there. So establishing that core team, bringing people in-house rather than subcontracting, being able to start to consolidate the operation. Um, LA is somewhere between the UK and Dubai in terms of our staffing levels. So we do still subcontract some work. So it'd be good to bring that in-house. Um, yeah, I think over 5 years, I'd like to see the three sort of separate entities reach a point of sort of parity, I suppose. Not necessarily in revenue, because I think that somewhere like Dubai probably could quite easily overtake the UK in terms of its revenue in the coming few years, just again based on the way the things are going. Um, LA is a little bit more of a question mark, but I think that it has the potential to really establish itself, and we can kind of re-up on the operation there, which has been running for some time.
Yeah, yeah, no, great. No, good. No, good luck with
Thank
all of
you.
that. It's good to hear that you've got that because people have different views on it. Some people say, well, 5 years is a bit longer, sorry. And but I think it's a thing of saying there's nothing wrong with planning and changing it,
Absolutely.
but having
I
no
think
plan
that
at all is a bit risky.
it is risky. So I think, as I say, I've got a kind of destination in mind. How we get there is still kind of being developed, and actually, in the most part, boils down to how much work we can win. That really is a leading factor for everything. But that obviously comes from how well we market, how well we network, blah blah blah. So it's all sort of symbiotically connected. Um, I think the key will just be how quickly those things happen. It could be that I turn around tomorrow and we sign a very big deal somewhere, and suddenly that 5 year horizon can actually be pulled forward, right? And you say, okay, well, now we can achieve that 5 year horizon in 2 years.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
absolutely, having that ability to adjust is crucial, I think. And I think it's also good to be, I like to do things as kind of think of them as sort of a good, better, best scenario, right? So if in 5 years, what does good look like? In 5 years, what does better or best look like? And you've kind of then got almost three things you can shoot for, and you can, I think, bring your team along for the journey with that. You're almost setting yourself a minimum, right? And then saying, okay, well, if we do this, then you guys will all share in that success in this way. Um, whether that's through promotion, through financial incentives, whatever it might be. But the more I think you can empower your team to come on the journey with you, the more chance you are of succeeding.
100%. No, I love that. And you've predicted what I was going to ask you next because you've gone straight into team. I was going to ask you about one of the biggest frustrations I get with business owners, and the bigger they get, this becomes more of a frustration. But it's not all frustration because people talk about great teams as well. But what lessons have you learned about how do you make sure you do have a great team? Because it's such a frustration if it goes wrong.
It's $1 million question, and something I still haven't fully figured out. The key thing I think is understanding what makes people tick. Everybody is different in what motivates them. For me, winning projects and making money are the two things that are my kind of success factors. I think for others, quality of life in terms of, life work balance. Um, maybe it's seeing their kids grow up in a particular kind of, in a particular environment. It's really about understanding everybody's individual requirements and needs and their family situations, their background to a certain extent that they're, whatever it is that they're happy to share with us, but something which allows us to kind of get under the surface really of saying, okay, this is my job. There's always stuff underneath there that people don't always, they don't want to necessarily bring to the surface, but actually can often paint a better picture for us as an employer, and also to help us support them in what it is that they really need.
Yeah, yeah.
Work needs to be fulfilling, but if it's just a means to an end, you're never going to get the best out of people.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. No, I like that. It's like diversity has become a bit of a dirty word for some people, but it's quite interesting that you say, forget about words, getting to know the individuals
Yeah,
as a basic, it's absolutely that's a key one that I always hear that if you understand your staff, you then know how to motivate them.
that's right. And I think the key word diversity, it's sort of been given, as you say, it's been given a bit of a bad name because a company should be diverse regardless. You shouldn't need to think about making it diverse. It's about hiring people who are good at doing what you want them to do and serving their function. It should not make any difference where they come from or what their background is. It's all about whether they can do the job properly. And as I said, with
100%.
some people, it might take a little while to get the best out of them. And that might be for a variety of reasons. And so sometimes you need to dig into those things and support people and nurture them. Um, I'm not a big believer in hire and fire. I don't think it suits. Um, I don't think there's a reason for it unless someone is being super delinquent, from the get-go. That is an opportunity to say, right, this is just isn't working. But I'm trying to think back to our history as a business. I can't think for the last 5, 6 years where we haven't tried to really get into people's psyche a little bit more and figure out what it is that they need.
Yeah, no, great attitude because you can have the hire and fire approach, but it can be very destructive for a business because
And
also
expensive.
clients don't necessarily appreciate keep talking to somebody different all the time. That can make people feel a
Absolutely.
bit uncertain.
Continuity is super important. And it does definitely does develop and build trust.
Yeah, yeah, no. AI, is that impacting much on you yet?
Define impacting. I think it is, for me, it's become an extremely useful tool. Um, I don't think in what we do, well, let's break this down into a couple of different areas. So AI is going to infiltrate our industry and already has in terms of how it can serve an end customer. So the AI that we're likely to see in the coming years is about learning and understanding the users and how they might use their home. So some of the brands that we install already have AI inbuilt, whether that is through things like voice control or improvements in learning around, the time somebody goes to bed, as an example, right? So let's say somebody starts going to bed at, you set the system up that bedtime is 10 p.m. Then they start going to bed at 9 p.m. Rather than us having to come in and reprogram the system to say, right, it's now 9 p.m. bedtime, the system would just learn it for itself. Say, okay, well, this person's starting to go to bed at, between 9 and 10 now rather than after 10. And as a result, I'm going to start the, wind down scene, let's call it that, earlier. And that might
Mm,
be, starting to change the color temperature of the lights or dimming them. It might be closing the curtains a little bit earlier than before. Things that help people get ready for to sleep really is one
yeah, yeah,
example
brilliant. Yeah.
where I can see it being useful. Same with waking up, just in reverse. Um, and then you've got AI on the business side in terms of how we're utilizing it as a tool. So it is becoming extremely useful for us when as a small team, um, iterating documents, creating things which we would normally have to employ somebody, or it's not employ somebody, sorry, but contract somebody like a lawyer or solicitor. We can get boilerplate documents built for us, that we then have somebody professional review. So I think it's saving a lot of time, certainly in that early stage discovery phase of lots of the work that we do, particularly on an administrative side. I don't think you're not going to get rid of lawyers or solicitors or people like that because you need people with experience. What you're getting from AI is it's a sort of quasi experience that is deduced from other things out there, right? It's not personal experience. And I think that is going to be where we see the biggest level of conflict with AI is how it features in our lives, um, and whether it can be used for good in the way that's the sorts of ways I'm talking about, or if it could become problematic. I think it's a bit
Mm,
early to say still, but it's certainly the single most important thing I think of possibly of humanity as we know it right now.
yeah,
Put it
yeah.
put it in line with the industrial age, right? It's
It's
going to
big.
it's a whole new horizon in terms of what's possible. But it's
Yeah, yeah,
also there are some elements of it which are a bit scary.
yeah. No, 100%. Have you got any particular books you talked about? You like to listen to podcasts, stuff like that. Are you a book reader or
I'm not a
audio
big book
person?
reader, actually. It's something that it's never really appealed to me as a content. Don't ask me why, but it's maybe to do with the way that my brain is wired. I tend to read smaller stuff than than sort of long form, if you will. I think that, as I say, I digest a lot of podcasts. I read a lot of news, so that comes through all sorts of different mediums. I'm quite interested in financial news, so I probably the longest articles I read are probably from the Financial Times and things like that, which will be a bit more in depth and cover a bit more breadth as well, I suppose. I read a bit when I'm on holiday, but I'm the sort of person who thrives on activity and being busy and doing
Yeah,
things
yeah,
that
yeah.
relate to the business. And, as I said, having these times where I can reflect and think about what's next.
Yeah, no, cool, very cool. Yeah, just finishing off really now. If I gave you £100 million to invest in business, what would you do with it?
It's a very interesting question. I think if it was investing in this business, I think I would probably look at purchasing competitors who have strong existing client bases or show real prospect in what they're doing in their own areas. If I was taking that 100 million and investing it in other businesses, I have a very long list of business ideas that I would like to see deployed at some point. So I'd
Hmm.
probably set up an incubator and actually start to put some of those ideas into action.
Lovely, love it. I know it would be lovely. It's part of my retirement plan is how can I help another generation of people in some country in the world that's a lot poorer than
Yeah,
Britain,
yeah,
and create a new generation of entrepreneurs who just don't have that access to support and help. And I can give that wisdom and support for peanuts or for nothing.
yeah. And I
How
think, experience and knowledge is one thing, but money is another, right? It really does, unfortunately, make the world go round. And I think that with it, you can do so much. It can be so divisive in so many ways. But with a sum of money like that, you could really do so much good. Uh,
Yeah, it's
and
enabler.
empower people to make money for themselves is much better than just giving people money, in my opinion.
100%,
You're
100%. I'm on
getting
that
you're
trip as
getting
well.
two things from for one, basically.
100%. Yeah, give somebody a wheelbarrow, they can
Yeah,
sell a lot more than they sold by walking by hand. Give them a
yeah,
bike,
yeah.
they can sell a little bit more, and it
Sell it
just goes
further.
from there. Yeah,
Yeah,
make some money, come back, get a bike, and then you get a motorbike, and it slowly builds up till you got a truck.
absolutely.
But as you said, if you give them money, in 10 years' time, you still be giving them money. So that's the dilemma. And
Yeah.
the last question really is: so people listening, some people got businesses already, some people might think about getting into business. What couple of tips would you give somebody in, going into business now or in business already? What do you think are the key lessons you've learned?
Um, Someone in business already is a difficult one because I don't think from one business owner to another, you're not necessarily going to understand what that person does. And while they may be an expert in something, and I might be an expert in something else, sure, there are some transferable skills there. Things like making sure your finances are in order, is probably the biggest one I would say, is making sure you
Hmm.
have a good grip on your finances. It will be the one thing. Get to know your audience and get to know them really well, because that's also going to be, you can have a very, as you said at the beginning, you can have a very good product, but if you don't know who you're trying to sell it to, or it's incorrectly targeted, it's just not going to go anywhere. And that's how
Yeah,
lots of businesses fail.
yeah, yeah,
Someone going into business, go for it, I think is probably the summary, but go for it with a little bit of caution. Don't rush it. In the same way, get to know the audience, get to know the landscape, get to know the industry it is you're going to go into. If you're doing something very cutting edge that has potential legislative restrictions that might come down the line, try and get out in front of those. Um, yeah, I think, but ultimately, business is part of me and always has been since, as I said, I set the company up out of school, and so it kind of is in my blood, if you will. But it's not for everybody. And some people think they can do it and just don't quite have the skills. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just, you have to be able to take the highs and the lows, I think. And
yeah, yeah. No, I love that actually because there's some people who say everybody should just tell your boss that he's a what's it and go out there and do it. But
if your
yeah, with
boss
my
who's a what's
experience,
it has done whatever it is to get there, right? It's not like he's just been put there.
exactly, it's not for
Somebody at
everyone.
some point has come up with whatever it is that you're trying to be part of. And I think that's also important for people to understand that if you want people to respect you, you need to respect them. And as I
Yeah,
said about hiring people, it's super important to understand what makes people tick. Otherwise, your business is never going to succeed. You're never going to be able to do everything on your own. You're always going to need people to help you. So you need to have good people to come along on that journey.
yeah, no, fantastic. Rory, I could speak to you all day. It's absolutely fabulous. Really appreciate your time.
Of course.
Um, and I hope people got a lot of little nuggets out of this and some joy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.